Κύριε Πρόεδρε, κυρίες και κύριοι, this great opportunity to have a global conversation with somebody who has lived through historic times as the head of the European Union. And I would like this conversation, Mr. President, to be about the past a bit, because you went through some momentous times when you led Europe, and about the future. But let's start with the future. Chancellor Merkel made a statement that was very dramatic the other day. She said that she had the sense that Europe cannot depend anymore on the US, and that it had to find its own ways to deal, especially with security problems. What do you think of that statement?
So first of all, let me just say how pleased I am to be here in Greece, in essence, Mr. President, my respects, and how much I evaluate positive this possibility to discuss these matters with you. Regarding the statement of Angela Merkel, I think I know well Chancellor Merkel, and when she says something, we should be attentive, because words matter. She does not speak just for speaking. So I think what she means is that Europe has now to assume its responsibilities. She is not against transatlantic partnership, on the contrary. She's probably disappointed that she does not see the same commitment from others. She's very strongly pro good relations with the United States and also with Canada, the transatlantic partnership. But she believes that it's time now for Europe to assume its responsibilities. I also agree with that. I think it's important that Europe, while remaining, of course, loyal to the Atlantic Alliance, assumes its responsibilities, not in challenge to the Atlantic Alliance, but complementing the efforts, and also in terms of our unity, that we give more credibility, more consistency to our union, for instance, in the economic and monetary union.
But our president referred to the stereotype that we in Europe, we are from Venus, the US is from Mars, and therefore that we don't have a real foreign policy and security dimension. Can you see a Europe in the next 5 to 10 years that has a much more rigid decision-making in terms of security issues, a common defense, common foreign policy, and so on?
I think we are going in that direction, but Europe, by definition, is an incremental process. We are not going to have the United States of Europe now. We are not the United States of Europe like the United States of America. We are 28, and fortunately soon 27, because British have decided to leave. But we are a union of democratic countries, and so decisions take place in a more incremental way. Sometimes it's frustrating slow. I have that experience. Sometimes it takes too much of our time, of our energy, of our political capital. But if you think strategically, how was Europe 10, 20, or 30 years ago, and how it is today? I mean, what a difference. And just looking at my experience, Commission, I was president of the Commission between 2004 and 2014. We were 15 countries, we became 28. 19 countries alone in the euro area. Now the European Union has more powers than before. The banking union, it's not complete. But the fact is that the very existence of the crisis was a trigger for more integration. The European Central Bank today has powers that were unthinkable before the crisis. In some areas, the European Central Bank has more powers than the Federal Reserve of the United States. So it's a step-by-step approach, including in terms of defense and security. I believe that's going to happen. By the way, security, it's going to happen, because if you want to keep freedom of movement inside the Union, we have to be more credible in the defense of our external borders. So I think there will be some initiatives, namely from France and Germany together. But of course, they are important, but they need others. All the countries are important in Europe. So I think we are going to see some steps further. Myself, I'm strongly pro-Atlanticist. I believe when we say that we should have progress towards a more European approach to defense, I think it should not be seen as against the NATO. On the contrary, just recently I was with the Secretary General of NATO, my good friend Stoltenberg, and he welcomes that. NATO now wants the Europeans to do more in terms of defense. But we can do it not as overlapping or challenging, but as complementing the efforts of NATO. So that Europe assumes more its destiny in its own hands, as Chancellor Merkel said, I think is a good, positive development.
It's one thing for us in Europe to be Atlanticist, but it's another thing when the President of the United States comes to the NATO summit and he does not mention Article 5, which is really the backbone of what NATO stands for.
Yes, I was disappointed with that. As you know, some other members of the administration, and recently I met, for instance, General McMaster, and also the Secretary of Defense, and others, including the Secretary of State, have tried to clarify that the United States remain committed to NATO. But it's true that we have not seen in this new American president, I say that with regret, the same, let's say, instinctive commitment, I would say almost emotional commitment to the transatlantic alliance that we have seen traditionally in other American presidents. By the way, NATO was one of the greatest creations of the United States of America. So I would like to see the American president more committed to our common defense. Some of our countries, for instance, Poland, the Baltic countries, they are suffering at this moment about what is the real commitment. No, I hope, and I really believe at the end, we may count on the United States of America, but it's true, I have to be honest, I'm no longer in public office, so you know my sincerity is growing day by day. So I'm expressing myself as a free person here. I'll welcome that an American president appears more committed to NATO and less friendly with President Putin.
Where is Russia coming into all of this? There's a big discussion, as you know, in the US about Russia. A lot of people think that, you know, once the US leaves a leadership vacuum, Russia is going to come in and try to carve its own sphere of influence in Europe. Are you worried about that?
Look, the leader I've met the most while in office outside of the European Union was President Putin. I met him more than 25 times in many capacities. When he was president, when he was prime minister, I met him. And I think President Putin
nice
is...
guy?
I mean, it's someone we can be speaking with, but it's not exactly the type of person my mother would like to see me with. Now, having said this, Putin is tough, but he's a rational person. When he sees an opportunity, he grabs it. He saw an opportunity with Crimea, or with Ukraine, he took it. He saw another in Syria, he took it. And the reality is that today, Russia counts more in the Middle East than before. That's the reality. Russia is a very important country and a very important civilization. I have the highest respect for Russia as a country, for its history, the extraordinary resilience of these people. They have built, in fact, the biggest country in the world in geographical terms. They have, with their European concept, they went to the Pacific. We have to respect Russia, but I think we have to respect Russia and deal with them and engage with them in the respect also of our own principles, with firmness, saying what we don't agree. I don't think it's intelligent to say that Russia is simply a regional power. It's a mistake to say that. Russia is more than a regional power. So we have to engage with them. At the same time, we have to make clear what we accept and what we do not accept. And that's the best way to serve stability in our continent. Because if we appear as weak, that will only encourage more, let's say, assertive or aggressive behavior of Russia. So this is my position. And I think, broadly speaking, that has been the position that has been followed by Germany, by France, by the United Kingdom, by the European Union countries. I was in the decisions when we decided about sanctions. I was in that meeting. And also by the United States. So a position of firmness, but avoiding useless confrontation, engagement at the same time.
What do you think about Brexit? It came as a surprise to many of us. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's a bit of a debate whether it's a wake-up call for Europe or whether you cannot really have a strong Europe without the UK playing a role, at least in defense and security matters.
Look, I deplore Brexit. I think it was a mistake. Of course, we respect democratic decisions, but I think it was certainly a mistake for Britain, and for Europe also is not good. Why? Britain is one of the biggest, most important countries in the world. It's the fifth economy. It's the only country in Europe, besides France, that is a nuclear power, that is a permanent member of the Security Council. It's home to the English language that today is the lingua franca in the world. A country that great network international, great geopolitical depth. London is the financial center of Europe and one of the most important financial centers in the world. So for all these reasons, when one member of the club like this leaves a club, of course, it's not good news. Having said that, we have to adapt, we have to mitigate negative effects, and we have to see what opportunities there are. I think now what the European Union has to do is to go forward. There was European community before Britain joined the European community. It was Britain that asked to join the European community. It was not the European community that asked Britain to join. It was Britain that asked to join the European community. And now Britain decided to leave. We are a free association of, we are not the Soviet Union. We are the European Union. Our countries are here because they want to be. If they don't want to be, they are free to go. Now, the same way the European community existed before Britain joined, the European Union is going to continue to exist after Britain leaves. And of course, the United Kingdom is also going to survive leaving the European Union. Now, I think what we are seeing today is that in some other countries that traditionally are considered like-minded, there is still a more sense of commitment to the European Union. We are not seeing this integration of the European Union. On the contrary, I think today we are seeing, and the elections in the Netherlands, the elections now in France confirm it, the idea that we should unite, we should avoid disintegration in Europe. And so I'm basically confident, very confident about the future of the European Union.
So you think what was called the tsunami of populism, which was seen in the Brexit case, we're worried about in France, as you said, in Holland, it's over? It's something we shouldn't worry about anymore?
I will not say it's over. I think we should avoid all forms of complacency, but certainly there were important cases of victory against that populism. And I think the election of Macron in France was extremely good news, because it has shown that it's possible to win with a very modernizer, reformist, pro-European agenda. President Macron is the most pro-European president ever in France. It's amazing. So the idea that you lose elections with Europe, it's completely false. What you have is to be clear and to be authentic. Now, having said that, populism has very, very deep causes. The populism is not specifically European. If I can tell you a story, in the last European Union American Summit, I had the honor to participate with President Obama. It was in Brussels. President Obama asked me, what can you tell me about these populist trends in Europe, like Le Pen and others? And I asked him, and what can you tell us about the populist trends in the United States, like the Tea Party and so on? And we have agreed that it's something in common. And we see populism and nationalism not only in the United States. We see in Russia. You see in Turkey. We see in Asia. I think it has to do more with globalization and the feeling that people have that about uncertainty regarding the future. And when there is uncertainty, when there is fear, people tend to close. It's a normal reaction of any biological entity. When there is fear, we close. So it's a serious challenge to our societies. Of course, in Europe, it is more challenging because we are a transnational union. So nationalism is a danger. Having said that, I really believe that in Europe, we have the means, the intellectual, the political means to win the battle against populism and to have, from the left, from the right, from the center, forces that defend their positions, but not with demagogy, not only exploiting fear, but with what I believe can be rational and reasonable solutions.
But you know well that there are some underlying causes behind populism, like global inequality, a breach of trust with the elites, social media, the loss of jobs because of technology. Are those being addressed, you think, by the global elite effectively?
Not yet completely. That's why I believe we should not be complacent, and the risks are still there. But I think from a political point of view, now these things have been understood. I think the parties, the so-called mainstream political parties from the center left to the center right, understood that they have to deal with these issues. Namely, in the left, there should be an answer that combines fiscal rigor, macroeconomic prudence with social commitment and social justice to avoid this inequality. On the right also, we should have a policy that is humanitarian in terms of accepting, of course, the refugees, but at the same time credible, defending our borders. We have to be honest about that. We cannot accept everybody that comes to Europe. We cannot accept illegal migration. We have to be, if we are not firm defending our external borders, we are going to see more and more xenophobic parties growing in Europe. So it's a question of balance. And I believe that our democracies, in spite of everything that people say against democracies, at the end, they are much more stable than dictatorships. Dictatorships, they give you the illusion that they take decisions in a more efficient way, but from one day to the other, they fall. While democracies, it's more time-consuming, it's more uncertainty, but at the end, our societies have a higher capacity to adapt, have higher resilience than the so-called authoritarian regimes.
You know, one of the problems has been that for every issue, for every problem that there is, politicians blame Europe and they blame the Commission. It's an easy scapegoat. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we have to say that the Commission is something impersonal, you know, so it's like the average citizen of a country doesn't understand what the Commission is. You know, they just see the announcements and the decisions and so on. Can this problem be solved in some way? I mean, can there be more legitimation of the role of the Commission?
As I told you before, I'm no longer in public office, so now my sincerity is total. I'm not here to defend the Commission, but I can tell you frankly what I think about this issue you mentioned. The real problem in Europe for me is not the Commission or the European Parliament or so-called Brussels. Of course, there are issues we can correct in the Commission. There are unnecessary decisions. There are some bureaucratic approaches, technocratic. It's true. Having said that, for me, the real problem is with our countries. And I was 10 years leading the Commission, but I was 12 years in the government of my country. So I'm not a bureaucrat, okay? Including as Prime Minister. So if we look at Europe, Europe is a union of states. But the problem is that some of our politicians at national level, they make what I say, the Europeanization of failure and the nationalization of success. When things go well, it's their merit. When things go wrong, it's the fault of Brussels. But the decisions have been taken by them in Brussels. The Commission, except in competition policy, has no final decision. The Commission makes proposals, and it's a very important institution. But the decisions, for instance, decisions in the euro area, they have been taken unanimously in the Eurogroup or the euro area summits, not by the Commission. You see? But it's very easy for the leaders, including leaders of the biggest countries, which frankly I cannot accept, to present the Commission or the European Union as a foreign power, as if it was a foreign power. We are Europe. Greece is Europe. France is Europe. Germany is Europe. So how can the leader of France or the leader of Germany or the leader of Greece say they? It's not they, it's us. We are Europe. So if there is something that is not right, let's make it work. But let's not put the Europeans as the enemy. I think this is very important because only with the sense of ownership we can reconcile the citizens of Europe with Europe. This is what is missing. So, of course, there are some institutional engineering, but frankly, I will not advise now Europe to go again for new discussions about treaties and new. I really believe that's not an important issue. The important issue is to agree on the politics and the policies, and for our leaders of our national level, including, of course, at European level, to show their sense of responsibility, the ethics of responsibility towards our common project.
Now, you talked about Macron. And of course, there was great relief in Europe about his victory. But, you know, he has 5 years to fix some really serious problems in France. And I always tell my friends that if France had done what Greece has gone through the last 7 years, there would have been another Bastille Day. So, I mean, do you actually think Macron has a chance to succeed in this, despite all the inertia and all the opposition he's going to have?
I think so. Probably he's not going to do everything he's now intending to do. I'm a realistic person. I know that sometimes there is a gap between our programs and our results. But even if he does only, let's say, 50 to 60% of what he says he's doing, it's going to be very important for France and for Europe. Let me tell you one thing, based on my experience of the European Union. Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, certainly. But don't forget one thing. France is probably the most important country in Europe. France is the only country in Europe that is north and south. Germany is north. Greece is south. France is north, but it's also Mediterranean. La France est incontournable, as we say in French. We cannot avoid France. And to my point of view, a big part of the problems in Europe have been the problems of France. When France has a crisis of self-confidence, and France, the last 20, 30 years, has a crisis of self-confidence, from the left to the right, they speak about decline, la décadence. The most sold book in philosophical terms in France in the last years has been one called La Décadence, decline. That sense of decline is, in fact, contaminating Europe. We need a France that is self-confident, modern, reform-minded. And if that France exists, I can tell you that Germany, and Merkel specifically, they will work with them to move ahead the process. I have no doubts about it. And of course, the others as well. But without France and Germany working together, there is not real progress in the European Union. It's a necessary, even if it's not a sufficient condition, but it's a necessary condition, France and Germany to work together. So that's why I really believe that a more self-confident France can change a lot and is good for Europe. And Macron, I'm not here speaking for Macron, but I think he has understood one thing, is that he has to do the reforms at the beginning. One of the mistakes of other presidents of France, including Sarkozy, with whom I worked a lot, was they wanted to make some reforms, but they postponed those reforms. And the kind of reforms we need in a country like France, for instance, the reform of the labor market, has to be done with a fresh legitimacy in the beginning, probably paying sometimes in terms of popularity, but giving the time to people to see the benefits. So I think that's going to happen, and I trust that it will be good for France and for Europe.
Now, there used to be the Franco-German axis in the old days, you know. I mean, Europe was built on that.
Yeah.
During your days, did you see that, a decline of that, obviously, right? I mean...
there were some crises, but...
or a lack of balance, let's say, between the two.
Yes, there was a lack of balance. I was in most of those meetings between, namely, Angela Merkel and Sarkozy, when we were, by the way, dealing with the issues of the euro crisis. It is true that at the beginning, there were also afterwards between Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande, at the beginning there are always problems of adaptation. But then both countries understand that they need each other. Don't forget one thing. Now that Britain is leaving, France is going to be the only permanent member of the Security Council. And Germany is a very important country economically, but Germany, to take some initiatives, they need at least the blessing of France. So in fact, they have to cooperate. It's in their vital national interests. Now I have no doubts that Angela Merkel will try to support as much as possible the program of Macron. There are differences in terms, namely, of the architecture of the euro area, but I think they are bound to cooperate. Once again, that's not all. We have other countries in Europe, and I come from a country more or less the dimension of Greece, so we should not, I don't like directorial. Having said that, we have to be realistic. We need those two countries to come together, and I think today there are better chances than ever in the past, comparing the past, for that to happen.
Now, as you know, Germany has been very reluctant to play the leading role in terms of security for historical reasons, and the rest of Europe is also reluctant to see that, and the world, I would say. Is that going to change, you think?
I think progressively it's going to change. Germany is a very big ship. It takes time to move, but it moves. And when it moves, they are very determined. That's my experience. I have no doubts of the strong, sincere commitment of Germany to the European Union and to the euro. In the most difficult moments of the crisis, in 2011, 2012, that's why I never lost the confidence in the future of the euro, when many people, including the United States, were predicting Grexit, were predicting the collapse of the euro. I never lost my confidence because I knew that that's going to be difficult, that the German position is difficult, but at the end, Merkel, and not only Merkel, the German system, the CDU, the SPD, the Liberals, the Greens, the German system is made a bet on the future of Europe. And it's extremely sincere. After the Second World War, Germany has decided to link its future to the future of the European Union. Now, that's why that statement of Angela Merkel that we have quoted just at the beginning here is very important. It's extremely important from my point of view, because it shows that now Germany is ready to go further. I mean, I think that's something also good for Europe. We have to be adults in Europe. If you want to compare the situation of Europe today, I can use an image that the Americans can understand well. It's like the young man or young woman when they go to college. We like the United States. We are for the United States. But now it's time for us to go to college, to live for our own.
We've been spoiled for a while.
Okay. And to assume responsibility. And it's quite obvious that in terms of defense, Europe has to assume more responsibility. From that point of view, President Trump is right. I mean, Europe, even if it's not committed to the defense as much as the Americans. So we should do more if we want to be responsible for ourselves. By the way, it's not the first time the American president said it. I was in NATO summits or meetings since the 80s as young deputy foreign minister. And let me tell that from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush to Obama, all of them asked Europe to do more. Mr. Trump says it in a more idiosyncratic way, but it's basically the same idea, that we should do more to protect ourselves.
How about Italy? Because a lot of people think that Italy is the weak link of Europe and that a lot will be decided there. Because if Italy goes in terms of its debt and the markets attack it, it's too big for anybody to save it.
Yes, it is. And I know there are some concerns about Italy. I remain confident in Italy. Italy, as I usually say, is the most creative country in the world. But they like to do things at the very last moment. Sometimes a little bit even after the last moment.
It feels very familiar here in Athens, I have to tell you. Yeah.
But Italy is a very rich country, very rich country. Only now they are, if you compare what British, the Germans, the Irish, the Spanish, and others have put as money to save their banks, Italy has done nothing, only now. It started with Monte dei Paschi. But they have resources to do it. They have resources. Italy is a very rich country indeed. So it's a political issue that has been, to some extent, preventing Italy to make those steps. But I think they will do it. And even if there is a populist government in Italy, which I hope will not happen, at the end it will have to adapt. It's not Europe that is going to change. It's Italy that will have to adapt to Europe. So I hope that we are going to avoid a populistic government in Italy. That will certainly be inconvenience, and it will create some turbulence. But frankly, even if it will happen, today European Union and the euro area are strong enough to deal with it. So I don't see a systemic challenge coming from Italy to the European Union. And I hope that Italians, as always, in their very peculiar creative style, they will... Can you see how creative they are? Have you imagined that movement, five-star movement? It's considered a populistic anti-European party. But have you seen that recently? They wanted to join the liberal group in the European Parliament that are almost federalists. So That was not very serious, frankly. But that shows the level of adaptability and creativity of the Italians in politics. So there will be a solution for the Italian problem. Let's hope that it's going to be by their own decision and not by pressure of the markets.
We have to interrupt you for 1 second because our president has to leave, the president of the Republic. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Please. Just to say, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Where were we? I was going to ask you whether you see a multi-speed Europe, because there's a lot of talk about this, and whether this also means a multi-speed Eurozone.
First of all, the idea of a multi-speed Europe is not new. One of the authors of that idea, in fact, was someone I think here you know well in Greece, is Mr. Schäuble.
Yes.
Schäuble wrote a very important article, a paper many years ago, Schäuble-Lammers, both of them, speaking about a kind of a multi-speed Europe. To be honest, I think this is nothing new. Already today, the treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, there is an article that allows for enhanced cooperation. If 9 countries want to go further, they can do it, provided they keep that system of cooperation open to the others who want to join. And today already in Europe, we have multi-speeds. We have Schengen and non-Schengen countries. We have we have the euro and non-euro. We have countries that are in the justice and home affairs completely, chapter, and others we have some kind of exceptions. So it's not completely new. But sometimes people like to use this argument, namely in the founding countries of Europe, to justify the fact that they cannot do more. But I think it's really an excuse. They could do more if they want. It is not because of new member states that there is no progress. In fact, every time there was a movement for more integration, including the economic and monetary union, including Schengen, most of the countries want to join. So it's true, we need some flexibility in the European Union. A European Union with 28 or 27 countries has to accept some variable geometry in some areas. Having said that, it is very important that all countries have the same dignity, the principle of equality among member states, and that flexibility does not mean stratification, that there is not a first and second class countries in Europe, because that will be negative for the European project.
And, you know, one elephant in the room is Turkey. How does Europe deal with Turkey? Because obviously it's an important country. The West cannot lose Turkey. But on the other hand, we have to say that Erdogan's behavior does not leave too much leeway, in terms of European decisions.
I would say it's an elephant out of the room, not in the room.
No, that's a good thing, yes.
Because frankly, I don't think Turkey, in the foreseeable future, it's not conceivable Turkey member of the European Union. They are not ready, obviously, and also Europe is not ready to incorporate a country like Turkey. I've been following all these years Turkey, and I know well President Erdogan. We have been working very closely in the negotiations, supporting some reforms in Turkey.
But it has changed over time, obviously.
That were positive. Having said that, I have to be very honest with you. The current developments in Turkey, namely in terms of pluralism, freedom of media, and others, are a matter of serious concern, serious concern. At the same time, Turkey, as you said, it's a very important country for us. Not only is a member of NATO, but it's for us in Europe. For instance, the refugee agreement is working, and this is good. This is good for Greece, and this is good for Europe. So I think we have to keep a constructive dialogue with Turkey. Turkey is also very important in terms of energy. It's in fact the other alternative to energy coming from the east, from Russia. We have now, in fact, it was myself who signed the agreement with the President of Azerbaijan. We have the so-called southern corridor that comes from Azerbaijan to Turkey to Greece, to Italy, the transatlantic pipeline. So Turkey can be a very important hub energetically, a very important country also in the issues of refugees, a very important country for the defense of NATO. But in the European Union, to be a member of the European Union, you have to be really a democracy. And unfortunately, the latest developments in Turkey are a matter of concern. So let's keep a critical dialogue with Turkey. I think it's important, namely for those in Turkey that want the modernization of the country. I think it will be a mistake to cut or to sever ties with Turkey. But at the same time, we have to be blunt and serious in what we believe are some principles.
As we come to the close of this conversation, I want to look a bit backwards. The Greek crisis happened during your term at the Commission. One big question in my own mind is, should the Commission have been much stricter towards Athens and should have warned Athens about the fiscal derailment before the crisis was apparent to everybody?
Look, as soon as we've got information about what's going on, we have acted. I don't know if you remember, but the European Commission has proposed, still in my first mandate, to have powers, audit powers of the Eurostat, the statistical office, to come to different countries and to verify the accounts. It was a proposal I've made, my commission made. It was rejected by France and Germany. They considered it was too intrusive. Because the Eurostat was based on the reports of the accounts given to us by the government. There was not a power of audit, internal audit. The first piece of legislation that my second commission put in front of the governments was precisely to give powers to the Eurostat to verify the accounts. And then the member states, they gave power to the European Commission. So today the European Commission has the powers to go in any country of the euro area and to check the accounts. That we did not have in 2008, beginning of 2009. So as soon as we had some information that something was wrong in the public accounts of Greece, we have acted, but probably not sufficiently, also because there were not sufficient instruments at that time.
Now, whose decision was for the IMF to join the Greek rescue program, and do you think it was a mistake when you look back at it?
That was basically a decision of Germany. And also those countries that are more or less aligned with Germany in the issue, Netherlands, Finland, and others, they considered at that time that the Commission was probably too close to the more vulnerable countries, to Greece, to Portugal, to Ireland. And so the IMF, by the way, the IMF had experience of bailouts that the Commission did not have also. But I think the real reason was not a technical reason. It was more a reason, and I can tell you, and Chancellor Merkel, she told me, we need the kind of a guarantee of the IMF. In the Commission, we did not receive it very well, to be honest, but I'm a realistic person. We said, okay, that was a condition. The creditor countries, they said, without the IMF, we are not going to give any kind of loans to the margin. So, okay, and we have created that originality that is the Troika. Also with ECB, the ECB, in fact, it's a monetary policy authority. The ECB also is there in a specific situation, but it was a technical thing. Commission, ECB, and IMF to prepare the decisions, but the decisions were not taken neither by the IMF nor by the Commission. The decisions were taken by the governments of Europe in the Eurogroup or in the Euro Area Summit.
Now, was there a moment when you thought that Brexit was a real danger, a real threat?
Of course, there were some moments where I was extremely anxious. For instance, when there was I think it was November 1911, the famous Cannes summit, when Prime Minister Papandreou announced the possibility of a referendum in the middle of in the middle of the panic in the market. That was an extremely difficult moment. And there were other moments as well. Having said that, I was always confident that Greece will be remaining in the euro area. I can tell you a story that sometimes I like to share with my friends. It was it's important also to understand Europe. It was June 2012. I invited the chief economists of the most important banks operating in Europe, European and American, for a brainstorm, 3 hours. And I've asked them, how many of you believe the euro is going to survive? And I've asked, how many of you believe Greece is going to remain in the euro by the end of this year? I put, 2012. All of them, except one, said Greece will no longer be member of the euro by the end of 2012. We are in 2017, and Greece is still there. So they were wrong. They were wrong. I think they should apologize, by the way. Because many of those analysts, they were feeling a negative sentiment in the market. And the market, to a large extent, is self-fulfilling. When you have the most important rating agencies, the most important analysts saying it's going to happen, it's very difficult to fight against that. They were wrong. And they were wrong because they were undervaluating the political thing. They were saying, Mr. President, it's impossible Greece to stay because look at the arithmetics, the sustainability of the debt and blah. Okay, and what about the politics of it? So, in fact, that's why I believe the euro area is more resilient than people think. And the European Union is more resilient than people usually acknowledged. Once again, it's frustrating. It's not perfect. It's, as the Americans say, muddling through. It's by successive adaptation, but it works at the end. But I believe that Greece was able to do it also because I know the commitment of the Greek people to Europe. And the fact that in spite of all the austerity, of all the difficulties, a majority of the Greek people wants to remain in the euro, I think it is a very important fact that we should not underestimate.
Were you worried at some point that the crisis was going to spread to the other countries in the south?
Of course. That's one of the reasons. And you know I come from Portugal. Portugal was the next in line. Portugal, in many areas, is comparable to Greece. I was absolutely sure that if Greece was falling, Portugal will fall, Spain could fall, and Italy. Italy was very close to disaster. In November 11, it was also in the G20 Cannes summit. It was still Berlusconi government when the IMF wanted to have a kind of a program for Italy. And Italy is one of the biggest economies in the world. If we have one of the biggest economies in the world under direct tutel control of the IMF, that will have a terrible impact in the confidence of the euro area. That's why the Commission was advocating no program for Italy. Let's find another solution. That's when Monti came, and afterwards the markets became clearer. And by the way, President Obama understood it. President Obama came to the summit with a different position, but during the summit he understood that it could do more harm than good to have Italy in the bailout program. So Greece was the first victim, and that explains partly the sacrifices of Greece, because it was the first. The other countries like Portugal, Ireland was also first in some areas, but we're already learning somehow with the problems that happened in Greece. But for me it was clear that the Greek case would be, if not properly solved, it will trigger a collapse in the euro area. That's why, by the way, there was this commitment to avoid Greece getting out of the euro. I think that at that moment it would have been not only bad for Greece, certainly, but also systemically extremely dangerous.
Now, I know you're going to write a book at some point, so you don't want to spill the beans too much, but what was the most dramatic moment from the Greek saga that you went through? Was it the summit in France, and you can share a bit more the atmospherics of it?
I think it was. I think November 2011, the G20 summit in Cannes was the most, because it was the perfect storm. We had here the call for a referendum that we were completely surprised.
You had not been informed about it?
No, not at all. That was creating a real panic in the markets. But we had a problem with Spain. it appeared the problem with the Las Cajas, some of the banks in Spain. Prime Minister Zapatero was there. We had the difficulties with Italy, I already mentioned. The last days of the governments of Berlusconi with a great skepticism. So it was the perfect storm. But afterwards, okay, things went once again by adaptation, incrementally. We could avoid that collapse. I think that was the apex of the crisis. There were many moments. For instance, the PSI decision, I think Deauville was also a critical moment because it created more skepticism. There were different moments, but I think that moment was probably the more, where there were indeed more existential doubts about the future of the euro.
When you look back, was there a moment that you regret, something you could have done different as a European leader in terms of the Greek program?
Look, the Greek program, I want to be very honest with you. I've done my best to support Greece, really, asking the creditor countries to be more generous in terms of extending maturities, lowering interest rates. Once again, I'm a Portuguese. I understand very well the Greek situation. At the same time, the European Commission, you also have to understand that here in Greece, the European Commission, the European Union, is not just, we have to have a combination. It's solidarity and responsibility, as we are saying. Some countries like to listen about solidarity, but they don't like to listen about responsibility. Others, they like very much the word responsibility, discipline, and so on, but they are not so enthusiastic about solidarity. The Commission was always acting a balancing act, you see. So I think basically the European Commission has done its job. We have done it, of course, discreetly, because at that time, there was already a cacophony, so many leaders saying so many things. That was bad for the markets. But if you ask what you regret, of course, probably I could have been more vocal at that time. Yes, maybe I could have done. Probably I could have communicated better. Yes, I accept that criticism. But I think, generally speaking, the Commission was on the right side, meaning trying to keep things together, discussing with the Germans, at the same time with the Greeks. I came here to discuss with Samaras, Prime Minister Samaras, very difficult moments, extremely difficult moments. And I think we gave a contribution to, at the end, to put the different countries together. And I think the alternative, because politics is also about alternatives. I know the situation was difficult and it's still very difficult, but we have to think counterfactually. What would have been the alternative? The alternative would have been a collapse, much, much worse for Greece and for Europe as a whole.
Let's conclude this on a positive note. Do you think the Brexit is completely off the books? Do you see an upside in this country? I remember casually you mentioned that you would probably invest or buy real estate in Greece because you really think there's an upside. Do you actually believe that?
I think, not completely out. Depends on what not Greece does still. But there are some people still that think in the European Union that it's better to pay Greece to leave than to stay in the euro area. I'm being very blunt with you. That school of thought exists.
Within Germany or also?
Germany, certainly, but not only Germany. Sometimes I say that Germany, compared with the Netherlands, is very moderate and very... At the end, Angela Merkel has played the role of mediator. There are much tougher positions in the European Union than the German position, I can tell you. The problem is, and now, at that time, 2011, 2012, it was clear that if Greece was leaving, that would have been a systemic challenge to all of us. Today, there is not that perception. Today, the perception is if one country leaves, the others can do it, because the markets now are more confident and all. Having said that, I think we should not take it for granted, and we should avoid complacency. At the same time, I think the situation is going better in Greece. And today, if I look at Greece strategically, there is a good thing. I don't want to intervene in internal politics here in Greece, but the perception that exists in Europe is that the next government will be more reformist. It's going to be better for confidence, for economic growth, for prosperity. So the medium term counts very much to the markets. What's going to happen afterwards? So, and there is, to a large extent, driven by tourism, but there is some growth in Greece. The euro area economy is coming up. In fact, it's a cyclical upswing, but the euro area is growing more than the United States today. I know that most English-speaking media does not like to say it, but the euro area is growing more than the United States, and so it's going up. So I think there are reasons for confidence in Greece, and at least I will not give up on the efforts, because this country has given also a lot to Europe, and it deserves. These efforts of the Greek people deserve to be recognized by the partners.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the frankness in the conversation. Thank you.